Teaching self-advocacy to children with a developmental language disorder. In every classroom, approximately 2 children will have a developmental language disorder. In the past, you may have heard this being referred to as specific language impairment, or language delay. However, there is now a consensus on the term developmental language disorder, or DLD. Having a DLD will lead to difficulty in all aspects of language and subsequently a child's learning. A DLD impacts how a child expresses themselves. For example, they may use shorter sentences compared to their peers. It will also affect how a child comprehends language. For example, they may have more difficulty understanding complex sentences. Since learning in a classroom involves language, a DLD will cause difficulty in all school subjects. It could impact how a child builds friendships and can ultimately decrease a child's self-esteem. When a child has a developmental language disorder, there are a number of ways teachers and speech-language pathologists scaffold a child's environment to help them better understand classroom material and express their ideas. One important aspect of supporting a child with a DLD that isn't always considered is self-advocacy. Self-advocacy is a person's ability to represent themselves, communicate their needs, and seek support to be successful. When someone isn't able to communicate their needs, this negatively affects their sense of autonomy and self-esteem. Increasing self-advocacy skills eases the transition into high school, as well as increases post-school outcomes, including employment success. Current research indicates that explicit teaching of self-advocacy is crucial for learning these skills. So far, the majority of research examining how to teach self-advocacy is in the high school populations, but currently, there is a push to integrate self-advocacy into the school-age population. Considering self-advocacy skills at younger ages gives children an opportunity to practice, which will lead to a smoother transition into high school. Deliberately teaching self-advocacy skills may be especially important for children with a DLD, as advocating typically involves communication, which is an area of weakness for these children. One program that explicitly teaches self-advocacy skills is the Learning and Education About Disabilities, or the LEAD program. This program is an evidence-based program developed by researchers who realized that students have a good sense of how their abilities or disabilities affect them emotionally, but do not know how they impact them educationally. Therefore, the goal of this program is educational ownership. To achieve this goal, the group leaders and students discuss specific academic strengths and weaknesses. Once aware of these strengths and weaknesses, students brainstorm about how their strengths could support them in class and where they may need additional support due to weaknesses. Next, students practice asking for accommodation with teachers, peers, and group leaders. The LEAD program reported that placing the responsibility on the student for accommodation minimized the impact of accommodation on the teacher's workload. As described previously, self-advocacy becomes a focus in high school, but introducing these concepts in elementary school is possible and will allow for a more meaningful transition to high school. First, I will review the steps in the LEAD program hierarchy, and then we will take a closer look at how steps 1 through 5 can be implemented in a school-age population. 1. Practice identifying and communicating strengths and weaknesses. 2. Brainstorm how to solve problems caused by weaknesses. 3. Develop ownership of one's strengths and weaknesses. 4. Model self-advocacy skills in a group or to younger children. 5. Create opportunities for improving self-advocacy skills in and outside of the classroom. 6. Join a support group that discusses self-advocacy. 7. Complete a community presentation on self-advocacy. And 8. Mentor younger students. Now I will align steps 1 through 5 with activities that would be appropriate for school-age children. By the time a child is between 6 and 8, they are beginning to identify problems and solve simple problems. This would be an appropriate time to introduce storybook characters that have various academic strengths and weaknesses. Have the child communicate the character's strengths and weaknesses to you or a classmate. As the child gets better skilled at identifying strengths and weaknesses, You and the child can begin to brainstorm ways to help the character address their weakness. By the time a child is 9, they are beginning to set goals for themselves, recognize when they meet and do not meet these goals, and identify their own strengths and weaknesses. At this point, you can work with the child to 1. Set appropriate academic goals. 2. Review their strengths and weaknesses. 3. Develop ways to support any area of weakness. And 4. Discuss if the supports they put in place allowed them to meet their goal. An example of this is as follows. Let's pretend you and a child are setting a goal to complete a science project on the metamorphosis of caterpillars to butterflies. A child may identify that they have very good drawing skills, but do not have strong writing skills. So together with the child, you may decide it is best if the child writes and draws to describe the metamorphosis. After the project, you can discuss if the supports led to a better outcome. Now that the child is learning about how to be their own advocate, they can model these skills in a small group. One activity for this stage would be to have the child role play and advocate for various accommodations. Lastly, the child can begin to advocate for themselves to a classroom teacher. Each of these steps will require scaffolding from the group leader, whether that be a teacher, a speech-language pathologist, or a resource teacher. This is very important because we want the child to be successful. We should help the child to successfully develop appropriate supports and ask and receive accommodation. Finally, by the time the child is 12, they will play a more independent role in identifying strengths and weaknesses and advocating for their own accommodation. Now they are well prepared for high school and ready for the final steps of the LEAD hierarchy. I will end this video with discussing who is available to help children with a DLD develop self-advocacy skills. Recent literature has urged speech-language pathologists to take a more active role. This is because SLPs are very well positioned to help school-age children. SLPs work with children to address their needs, which lends itself to discussing weaknesses and putting in the supports to address those weaknesses. Secondly, SLPs can work with children to build the communication skills that are necessary to communicate their needs and receive the appropriate accommodation. In conjunction with the LEAD hierarchy, 3 ways SLPs can work to provide children with a DLD the necessary communication skills are: 1. Listen and assess what supports a child needs. Then reassess the child since their weaknesses will change as they grow. 2. Collaborate with teachers as they can identify the areas a child needs support. 3. Build communication skills using a capabilities approach where the child can learn from but also express themselves using a variety of means. Together, SLPs and teachers can implement a variety of strategies to increase self-advocacy earlier in a child's life. This will create educational ownership that leads to greater success in their future.